This is Ship It with Justin Garrison and Autumn Nash, a podcast about everything that happens after Git push. Ship It is brought to you by Fly.io, the home of changelog.com. Launch your apps close to your users all around the world. Learn how at Fly.io.
What's up, friends? I'm here with Dave Rosenthal, CTO of Sentry. So Dave, when I look at Sentry, I see you driving towards full application health, error monitoring where things began, session replay, being able to replay a view of the interface a user had going on when they experienced an issue with full tracing, full data, the advancements you're making with tracing and profiling, cron monitoring, code coverage, user feedback, and just tons of integrations. Give me a glimpse into the inevitable future. What are you driving towards?
Yeah, one of the things that we're seeing is that in the past, people had separate systems where they had like logs on servers, written files. They were maybe sending some metrics to Datadog or something like that, or some other system. They were monitoring for errors with some product, maybe it was Sentry. But more and more what we see is people want all of these sources of telemetry logically tied together somehow. And that's really what we're pursuing at Sentry now. We have this concept of a trace ID, which is kind of a key that ties together all of the pieces of data that are associated with the user action. So if user loads a web page, we want to tie together all the server requests that happened, any errors that happened, any metrics that were collected. And what that allows on the back end, you don't just have to look at like 3 different graphs and sort of line them up in time and try to draw your own conclusions. You can actually like analyze and slice and dice the data and say, hey, what did this metric look like for people with this operating system versus this metric look like for people with this operating system, and actually get into those details. So this kind of idea of tying all of the telemetry data together using this concept of a trace ID or basically some key, I think is a big win for developers trying to diagnose and debug real-world systems, and something that is we're kind of charged the path for that for everybody.
Okay. Let's see you get there. Let's see you get there tomorrow.
Yeah.
Perfectly. How will systems be different? How will teams be different as a result?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, again, I'll just keep saying it maybe, but I think it kind of goes back to this debuggability experience. When you are digging into an issue, having a sort of a richer data model that's, your logs are structured, they're sort of this hierarchical structure with spans. And not only is it just the spans that are structured, they're tied to errors, they're tied to other things. So when you have the data model that's kind of interconnected, it opens up all different kinds of analysis that were just kind of either very manual before, kind of guessing that maybe this log was, happened at the same time as this other thing, or were just impossible. We get excited not only about the new kinds of issues that we can detect with that interconnected data model, but also just for every issue that we do detect, how easy it is to get to the bottom of it.
I love it. Okay, so they mean it when they say code breaks, fix it faster with Sentry. More than 100,000 growing teams use Sentry to find problems fast, and you can too. Learn more at Sentry.io. That's Sentry.io. And use our code CHANGELOG. Get $100 off the team plan. That's almost 4 months free for you to try out Sentry. Once again, Sentry.io.
Hello and welcome to Ship It. I'm your host, Justin Garrison, and with me as always is Autumn Nash.
See, we ended up going like 2 hours yesterday, and now we started before the intro.
I think we're just going to roll most of that intro right now, and because a whole conversation about kids learning how to project manage and automate.
My daughter is like absolutely smitten with our smart, turn the lights on and off our voice, and she will run up to like when Mandy, my wife, is on the FaceTime with someone, she'll like run up and yell like turn off the lights to try to turn their lights off on the other side of the phone, because she has an aunt that will like do it for her. Like when she comes up, she'll
and pretend.
Well, no, she'll actually has like Alexa lights, so she'll like when Dylan runs up, she'll and says it like she knows. She'll say, Alexa, turn off the lights, and the lights will turn off, and Dylan's just like, power.
Over the phone. That's great.
Yeah, because she hasn't figured out, like, she keeps trying, but Siri is like, she's just not good enough at the words yet for Siri to pick up on it.
Yeah.
Like, she's trying, but Siri just does not.
Life gets real when like they can understand your children, because all of a sudden you have 6 things in your Amazon cart that you don't know where they came from.
I'm not really looking forward to that moment of the diction getting good.
Don't let them find out that there's a fart song and a bunch of other stuff, because like
The fart song.
oh my god.
Yeah, I'm probably going to rethink my opinion about smart homes as soon as in another year or so.
Yeah, my kids would for like an hour spend just like changing the color of all the lights. They're like, wait, make them blue. Oh, now make them orange. And they're so, oh gosh.
Somebody put the longest song ever, or what is it? The
song
it's
that
like
never ends.
Yes, on Alexa. Why though? Why? Like, I was like, do you just hate us parents? Like, what is wrong with you?
I just think about like how much money, like I have YouTube, like I got YouTube Premium because we will favor YouTube Kids, and just like it's limited to like certain channels. I'm just thinking like how much money has Miss Rachel made off of me?
Oh, Miss Rachel is ballin'. Forget that. How much money has Ryan made off of all of us? That kid's got $21 million and he's like 7. Like,
yeah. The economics of children's YouTube, I don't like to think about it because
I just try to ban my kids from most YouTube because I'm tired of watching it, and it makes me mad that they really believe half of it, and I'm like, that's fake.
Like, yeah, it's like I mean, she's 3, my daughter's 3, so she's still, pretty young, and it's really just like, okay, please watch the tablet while
you try to survive.
We're in like survival mode, so it's kind of like,
yes,
okay, you get Miss Rachel, you get PBS, and you get super simple songs. Go over here while we're trying to like do something.
That used to be us and Blippi, but thank God Blippi now is on like
Amazon
Prime.
We never got Blippi, thankfully.
Don't do it. It's so creepy.
My youngest wants Danny Go right now.
Oh yeah, I'm hoping that we can stick to like the just normal or the not weird corner of children's YouTube.
It's so weird.
Yeah, it'll probably last until she gets older, and then her wonderful little friends at school will tell her about all these fun things she doesn't get.
It's like my youngest they watch like a Danny Go YouTube video in class. And so he comes home and he's like, I have to watch Danny Go. I'm like, no.
Great. Thanks. Thank you, educational system.
I've banned them to like Epic, but they even watch like YouTubes and like PE and like different like Doug and all these different questions things, which I mean like they're schooled at, they're like educational.
Yeah.
But I'm like, if you can't find it on Epic or like PBS, like you're out of luck. They learned how to Google though and ask Alexa how to do stuff. And like they found out so many ways around like system like child locks that like at this point they should hire my 4-year-old to work for the damn NSA. Okay, like he figured out PlayStation's entire like child lock thing, and tell me why he can't play Plants vs Zombies and he can't play like regular games, but he's figured out how to re-download Fortnite 6 times. Like
you know what?
Who made this?
Children are like the amazing about children is like the level of motivation for highly specific tasks.
Yes, like I can't get them to clean their rooms, but let me tell you, they found a way how to get on Google and Amazon through my like child protection locks, and they're like, "Mom, this is the Halloween like outfit costume I want," and then here's this thing, and I'm like, "How did you like?" First you're like, "No, not that," and then you're like, "Wait, but how did you get there?" Like it hits you.
Yeah, it reminds me of that bit that went around a few years ago where it's like some girl was like, "Oh, I got banned. Like my parents took my phone, so I'm tweeting from my fridge."
And I have the Twitter fridge. That's some shit my kids would figure out. Like, I just sat there for a minute and I thought about how many screens are in my kitchen and living room because it's one big open like room, and it's like at one point my kids were watching YouTube on the Alexa show, then they were watching it on the fridge and then on the TV, and I was like, you can see each screen from each wall. Like, what are we doing?
Oh god, the worst is when they like watch different things on this.
Oh,
like
4 things at once.
Oh my god, my kid does that. He'll be watching TV.
Yep, she'll have like PBS on the TV, and then she'll like go over and get the tablet and like watch Miss Rachel on the tablet, and then like stop, and then do like one of these. Just like watch the TV and watch the tablet at the same time.
Yeah, my oldest is playing Minecraft, watching a YouTube video, and on his tablet, and I'm like, "What are you doing?" Like, what?
Amazing level of multitasking.
Okay, my kid will build a game in Scratch, right? While he's watching TV, making his brother play one game that he made as his beta testers that he's yelling at on his laptop. And I'm just like, you can't yell at your testers, bro. Like, what are you doing? Like,
You're gonna unionize. Your brother's gonna unionize.
I swear, I hope they do. I hope they like. We want one piece of candy per game
collective
testing.
voice now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like,
collective bargaining. This is never too early to teach labor relations.
I'm telling you. I was like, first of all, those are your beta testers. And then he was like, they were asking for different things and to change it. And he was like, that's not how you play it. And I was like, then you didn't write it clear enough.
Welcome to users.
He was so mad. And
We're
he was yelling at
Jira
him.
now.
Yes. And I was like, that's not how this works.
You should just use this as like the cold open.
This is
The entire conversation just needs to like just drop it in at the beginning.
People were like, "What show is this?"
Yeah.
Welcome to Ship It, the
Welcome to
podcast
Ship-
all about your kids learning how to
You're
manage
teaching your
software.
kids about project management. It's never too early.
Okay, but hear me out. Like, we should do like one where like we just have like toddlers sitting here, like talking about like tech and Minecraft. It would be so funny. Like it'll be like the faces of Ship It, but like mini Ship It, and we'll put like the headphones on.
You get one of them to have a Scratch app, and all of them talking about like how they're using it wrong.
That kid gets mad downloads on Scratch. Okay, like he gets mad downloads. Like he is.
A podcast of 8-year-olds talking about Minecraft mods would probably be like utterly fascinating.
It would also get our kids off our backs. Okay, at one point when we all worked at the same company, we were like, okay, if we get one Minecraft server, we can get through the summer.
Yeah.
Why didn't you make the server, Justin?
Because Logan doesn't care anymore. He just went on a friend's server.
Logan's
He's like,
a grown man. Okay,
yeah.
what did you do?
He has his first dance tonight.
Oh.
What?
Like, this is like he is going to a
What?
dance. I know. I'm like,
He sent me a picture of Logan the other day, and I was like, what grown man is with you at the base hockey game? Like, I was like, what?
I'm a few years out from all that, thankfully. So.
Oh, it happens quickly. Okay. Like, I have a 10-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 5-year-old, and he was like, Mom, don't help me get out of the car. My friends are watching. And I was like, oh, what? I was like, I wipe your butt. Like, what do you mean? Like,
Ours is no, we still got just the one, and she's 3, so it's
just don't get outnumbered. Just FYI. Like,
trust me. No, I had the one after the first mental breakdown I had in the bathroom when she was like 6 months old. Like I'm just like, all right, we're done.
you're gonna have more of those.
Oh, I'm sure I'll keep having mental breakdowns, but it's just like, you know what? It's gonna be 2-on-1 for the rest of this.
But hear me out, though. I don't even got to be good at video games because the 3 of them will beat up on teenagers and they carry my ass in Fortnite. It's
Hey,
great.
there you
Like,
There are advantages.
I don't even carry in groceries anymore. I'm just like, I Instacarted it. Like, I paid for it. Like,
Carry me to Victory Royale.
He was like, my kid was like, why don't they just like automate taking out the trash? And I was like, we did. I had you. Like, what do you mean?
this is the automation.
Congratulations. You figured it out.
You are the automation. Also, like, it would be my kid that says we should automate taking out the trash. It's like, I broke you.
This is our 30th show, which is
Yay!
awesome. Thanks for we've been doing this for just a little while now, and that's been awesome. Today on the show we have Austin Parker, who Austin, you work at Honeycomb. I don't actually know your title.
Director of Open Source.
Director of Open Source. Awesome. And we're going to talk a lot about OpenTelemetry today, which is one of the things that I was interested to hear more about from you, because that is a topic that I know very little about and I always want to learn more. But again, we went through this whole background of kids and building their own stuff and automation. And I think at the end of the day, we ended up with like, kids, you're on the screen too much, so you need to start a podcast. And that's like how we're going to solve some of this problem.
Well, we also have come to the conclusion that we've created our own baby version of the nerds that we are.
I think that's your prerogative as a parent, right? Like you just want to, Your proactive parent is like, okay, I have all these menial household tasks, and so I'm going to invest in a child so that within 10 years they can take the trash out and get mad at me about it.
I asked them to, I think one of them to clean the room. You would have thought that I was murdering them. And I asked my son to wear a jacket today to school. It's 45 degrees outside. He was so mad that he couldn't wear shorts. And I was like, I'm sorry that I'm trying to keep you from dying of like frostbite. He was like, I'm going to get heat stroke when it goes up to 50 today. And I was like,
kids and users have a lot in common.
It's like arguing with tiny terrorists.
Yeah, the thing that you can fire customers, but you can't fire your own children, which is
bad decisions were made. This was not thought out.
But it reminds me of all those times you see people on Twitter or whatever. It's like, oh, we both work in software, and so we have a Asana or a Jira for our household. I'm just like, who hurt you?
Okay, don't get me wrong. At one point, I did make my kid write a one-pager on why he wanted a bearded dragon, and then I was like, "Oh, we've gone too far."
No, that's too much.
I think you've gone officially beyond the pale when you start doing OKRs for your children, which is honestly such a. I mean, it's terrible that I said it. And I've birthed this into the world, and at some point, we'll probably end up
someone's gonna do it now. It's your fault.
It is. Which is really the story of my life. Is
you say something and regret it later when it happens.
That's how the Deserted Island DevOps happened. I made a joke on Twitter, and then I'm the Animal Crossing DevOps conference guy.
Is that still going?
No.
Wait, Animal Crossing DevOps, go back.
Deserted Island DevOps. It was the world's first virtual DevOps conference held in Animal Crossing. We ran 3 years during the pandemic.
I'm going to buy a Switch right now.
You can watch it on YouTube. Deserted Island DevOps on YouTube, and you can watch all the talks. It was great.
Were they animals?
I mean, it was we used the multiplayer in, whatever the newest one is, right? And people would bring their villagers onto the island, and then I set up a little room that looked like a conference room, little podium, and they would give their talks, and I live streamed the Switch and muxed in the audio from them talking over a Zoom, and then overlaid their slides. It's very cute. Go look it up on YouTube.
This is the most amazing thing I've ever heard of.
We'll have it in the show notes.
I was just gonna say these are gonna be the most fire show notes ever.
desertedisland.club or on YouTube, Deserted Island DevOps. Everything should still be up there. But yeah, we ran the last one a couple years ago, and it was very fun. It was it was an inversion where, because it was kind of people were traveling again, we found an island in Michigan called Mackinac Island that had a hotel on it and an event space. And so all the speakers came in, and the speakers were all in the same place. And then we still live streamed the Switch, but people were all in the same room together. It was a nice way to kind of put a bow on that little experiment. But
you should bring Animal Crossing DevOps to DevOps Days LA at scale, and it would be so much fun. We'll all just sit there and play Animal Crossing.
We could, maybe. I mean, it might come back at some point. I keep meaning to go out to scale, but the DevOps Days LA it's never at a great time for me.
March in Pasadena, though. I mean, come on, it's
a perfect time.
It's usually either so close to KubeCon or it's scheduled against KubeCon EU that the travel doesn't work out.
Yeah. Especially if you're traveling twice for 2 different conferences in different directions, it gets difficult.
Yeah, especially Europe and then back, West Coast. I live on the East Coast, so.
The whole time I was take me to Paris with you, because everybody was going to Cucumber. So I was put me in your packet, your suitcase. I just want a croissant.
The croissants were really good.
Dude, everybody was eating croissants on Twitter the next week, and I was like, I hate you all.
The croissants were really good. Don't worry, we're in London in 2025, so much love to all my friends in the UK, but British cuisine is an oxymoron.
I wouldn't be as excited about the food.
Lovely people, though.
I do want to go to London. I want to go see all the sights.
I just went a few weeks ago, and I drove a Mini Cooper, a classic Mini Cooper, for
fun.
the first time. Rented one. Fantastic.
Did you drive on the opposite side of the road too?
I did. The steering wheel was on the right side. We were driving on the right side. It's a stick, it's a manual, so I had to shift with my left every the first time, and I did okay. I think I got my first speeding ticket. So there are a lot of. I saw a flash of lights as I was going off to return.
I know. I was like, wait, how are we not sure?
Yeah.
They have a lot of automated speeding ticket cameras throughout.
They love their automated cameras over there.
Yes. And so I was going to return the car and I went a little faster on what I thought was a highway, but it turns out the speed limit was not highway speeds. So I saw a flashlight and I'm still waiting to see if the ticket comes in the mail.
You went to London and this is the story that you came back with? You're like, I went and I got my first.
If they get it across the pond to you, then that's impressive.
It's licensed under the rental company's name. Yeah. So I told them, I was like, hey, by the way, I may have got a ticket. I saw a flashlight. If you get it, email it me. I was like, if they have a picture, I want it.
Yeah, I want to frame it. I want to put it on my wall.
It's gonna be framed. Yeah.
Justin's the only person who will be like, hey, I could get out of the speeding ticket, but I want the picture. So like, here's my contact information. Please come after me because I just want the picture of it.
My first speeding ticket. It's fine. It's great.
I drove on the wrong side of the road and all I got was this speeding ticket.
This is also the man that has pictures of his broken arm on like the internet. So like, Justin.
Well, I had to put it somewhere.
What else is the internet for?
I know.
Hey friends, you know we're big fans of Fly.io, and I'm here with Kurt Mackey, co-founder and CEO of Fly. Kurt, we've had some conversations, and I've heard you say that public clouds suck. What is your personal lens into public clouds sucking, and how does Fly not suck?
All right, so public clouds suck. I actually think most ways of hosting stuff on the internet sucks. And I have a lot of theories about why this is, but it almost doesn't matter. The reality is if like I've built a new app for like generating sandwich recipes because my family's just into specific types of sandwiches that use Braunschweiger as a component, for example. And then I want to like put that somewhere. You go to AWS and it's harder than just going and getting like a dedicated server from Hetzner. It's actually like more complicated to figure out how to deploy my dumb sandwich app on top of AWS because it's not built for me as a developer to be productive with. It's built for other people. It's built for platform teams to kind of build the infrastructure of their dreams and hopefully create a new UX that's useful for the developers that they work with. And again, I feel like every time I talk about this, it's like I'm just too impatient. I don't particularly want to go figure so many things out purely to put my sandwich app in front of people. And I don't particularly want to have to go talk to a platform team once my sandwich app becomes a huge startup and IPOs and I have to like do a deploy. I kind of feel like all that stuff should just work for me without me having to go ask permission or talk to anyone else. And so this informed a lot of how we built Fly. Like we're still a public cloud. We still have a lot of very similar low-level primitives as the bigger guys. But in general, they're designed to be used directly by developers. They're not built for a platform team to kind of cobble together. They're designed to be useful quickly for developers. One of the ways we've thought about this is if you can turn a very difficult problem into a 2-hour problem, people will build much more interesting types of apps. And so this is why we've done things like made it easy to run an app multi-region. Most companies don't run multi-region apps on public clouds because it's functionally impossible to do without a huge amount of upfront effort. It's why we've made things like the virtual machine primitives behind just a simple API. Most people don't do like code sandboxing or their own virtualization because it's just not really easy. There's just no path to that on top of the clouds. So in general, like I feel like, and it's not really fair of me to say public clouds suck because they were built for a different time. If you build one of these things starting in 2007, the world's very different than it is right now. And so a lot of what I'm saying, I think, is that public clouds are kind of old. And there's a new version of public clouds that we should all be building on top of that are definitely going to make me as a developer much happier than I was like 5 or 6 years ago when I was kind of stuck in this quagmire.
So AWS was built for a different era, a different cloud era, and Fly, a public cloud, yes, but a public cloud built for developers who ship. That's a difference. And we here at Changelog are developers who ship. So you should trust us. Try out Fly, fly.io. Over 3 million apps, that includes us, have launched on Fly. They leverage the global Anycast load balancing, the zero config private networking, hardware isolation, instant WireGuard VPN connections with push button deployments, scaling to thousands of instances. This is the cloud you want. Check it out, fly.io. Again, fly.io.
Austin, I think we started this conversation on Blue Sky as you were ranting about security.
Yes.
And it was a while ago, and I don't even remember what the context was, but I remember it was enough to say, you want to come on the show and talk about it.
Yeah, I think my actual rant was something around like the biggest obstacle to actual security is actually just like security policy and controls. It's super interesting to me because if you think about, to extend the metaphor a little bit, right? Or by way of example, password policies. Everyone knows, like, oh, you have the password. It's like you can't use the same password twice. You can't use the same, you can't have your date of birth in it. It can't have your name in it. It can't have all this stuff in it. And for years, we just all kind of like accepted, like, okay, my password is going to be this one random string I memorize, and then every month I increment something at the end, or I add a number to it, or whatever. And it doesn't actually increase security because I'm using the same password everywhere. And so, slowly over time, the standards change. And now NIST says, like, oh, you don't actually have to do, like, password rotation every month for users is not recommended.
Right.
But I think you see this in so many areas of, like, security, especially, you give someone, it's like, oh, we want to make sure that people have, like, super locked down corporate devices. So we put, all these agents and we have all of these timeouts and da-da-da-da. And what do people do is, like, they want to get stuff done. They see the security controls as an obstacle to getting stuff done, so they just completely bypass the security controls. They use personal devices. They use shadow IT, da-da-da-da-da. I'm not saying that those people should do that, right? Like, I don't work in security, and you should never take my advice about it. But I think it's actually super instructive to, like, the rest of, like, how we think about software systems and systems in general is there's so many, like, best practices and things that we do and say, it's like, well, you just do it this way, just do this thing, and that's going to solve your problem. But the more friction that those things add to the experience of whatever you're trying to actually accomplish, then the more people will cut around them in order to make it easier for themselves to do what they actually want to do or need to do. And it's not just security, right? Like, it happens in observability, it happens in CI/CD, it happens in DevOps, it happens in anything you want to point to. The more controls you put in a way, if you're not thinking about how do these actually fit into how work gets done, then you're going to run into people bypassing the controls.
That's so true. Like, going from a solutions architect to, like, actually, like, being a developer in production, it is wild. Like, when you're trying to give people best practices and then seeing how things work in production and how, like, you want to do best practices, but at the same time, there's so many things that don't work the way that best practices and architectures are usually diagrammed. I almost wish people had more thought into that, because they make it really hard when they kind of, like, imagine these controls or these, I don't know how you'd explain it, but these different advice, but
what
like
the ideal world would look like if we could implement this thing.
Yes, like, it's like
Yeah.
it's almost doing it in a world that doesn't actually exist, and I'm like, can we get something that's a little bit more reality based, so that way we can actually follow those rules?
I mean, a lot of it is just like intro to physics stuff, right? Like, when you think, go back to high school or college and you think about, like, physics education, where a lot of it's like, okay, assume, a frictionless plane,
Yeah.
and then do this math or this formula. But it's like, okay, but in the real world, I can't assume that. And the reason that we say, like, assume a frictionless, we when we're teaching people, when we're educating, I think a lot of times we want to take that complexity, or we want to take these extrinsic forces and sort of say, like, okay, set that aside for a moment. And the hope is that by taking that part away, by taking all that complexity away, we can get at what's, like, really important, like velocity, like calculating velocity, or these other, like, really core foundational concepts. The problem is that in software, especially, I feel like we miss that second part, which is, like, why do we assume a frictionless plane? We assume a frictionless plane because if you don't get that higher level if you don't get, like, the friction, the plane is not actually important to the concept you're trying to get through, like, how to calculate the velocity, or decay, or whatever, based on mass. And if you don't understand that concept, then you're never going to get to the point where adding in the friction and adding in hills and all that other stuff is going to actually make a difference. But then we go into, like, the software world, and we start out by assuming, like, everything must be a frictionless plane. It must be a perfectly spherical cow. Security, observability, logging, deployment, whatever you want to point at, we package all of our lessons up in this way that is completely ignorant of the context surrounding like how work gets done at organizations, how different one system is from another, even systems built in the same tech stack, and what is really like what are the things that are not just driving value, but like the decisions that lead to like what gets prioritized, what drives value in not just like for a customer, but like what drives value in the engineering organization. What is the thing that gets you promoted or gets you a good review or hits your OKR? Like all of that, I think that's the plane. That's all the extrinsic forces, but bouncing up against our like best practices. And unless we kind of think about that as engineers and as like people working in production or people talking about how you should work in production, then we're just going to keep running into this problem of telling you all the 101 stuff over and over again. And then when it doesn't work, being like, well, you didn't do enough best practices.
You're doing it wrong.
You should have best practiced harder.
I think that's the most frustrating part about being an engineer. It's like there's so many things that will teach you like the concepts of writing code or the concepts of doing like general things, but there's so many more nuances and context that you need to actually write production code at scale. And we do a horrible job at teaching people that. And just like giving people the documentation, and sometimes you run through documentation and you're like, did you even do this to see if it worked before you released this on the internet and told people this was going to be how people use your product? Like some of the most successful databases are successful because they have good documentation and it's easy, not necessarily because it's the best tool for it, you know?
Yeah.
Especially docs like that, they make so many assumptions about almost all of them. They all have to focus on an individual because there's one person reading the docs. And I had this problem over and over again at Amazon where I kept telling, like, all of our docs were like, you should be able to go do this thing and deploy it to Kubernetes. And I'm like, wait a minute, this works for me at Amazon because I'm an admin on this AWS account. Go to any other company of someone trying to do this, and they're gonna have to go email 4 people to get access to do that thing that you just told them, oh, this will be easy. I'm like, this is one step. I'm like, no. Let's break this up into like, I have your admin account credentials and you have this amount of access to a cluster. Now go follow your docs and tell me where it's going to fall apart, because you have to switch back and forth to an organization complexity of like, now there's 4 teams. The one manages the database, one manages network, one manages the cluster, one's AWS account. It's like, now how are you doing this? Like none of that practice works anymore. And that's exactly also what you're talking about. Like, now I'm like, now I just make a friend over on that other team and say, hey, can you do this for me? Like, I'm not going to file a ticket. I'm not going to go through all the steps. I just need to get this done.
I think there's a really interesting corollary here with stuff like Open Policy Agent in the, and I, again, not a security person, but OPA, my understanding is like, it's a way to write manifests about security policies for code. And I think there are analogs to this from various clouds. And it's a cool idea. It's basically like, okay, here's like a manifest file that describes all the different sort of like security stuff for this service, and like what ports should it talk on and what routes should it have and what is the ACLs and da 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 da. But when you get down to it, it's kind of like a lot of it looks like a bunch of security people kind of went and looked at all this code that the developers were writing and said, I don't really understand all this code. I want to take all the things that I care about. I want to put them in this little security box over here. And then I want to write tooling that interacts with the security box. And then I'm going to make all the developers like figure out how to translate what they're doing into things that fit in my security box. Right. And in a lot of ways, I think that, the legacy of sort of the cloud transformation has been that in a lot of ways, right? Where we build everything on top of abstractions, but we try to make the lines between those abstractions a little less gray, a little less porous than maybe they would have been in the past, so that we can say like, okay, build and deployment, those are CI/CD problems, those are DevOps problems, and they go in the DevOps box, and the DevOps people use this stuff. And security stuff, that all goes into the security box, and dev stuff goes into the dev box. And in doing so, we've kind of lost the entire lesson of like Agile and DevOps to begin with, which was it's about working code over process, right? It's about like responding to needs. Like the entire idea of DevOps is
reducing friction.
Reduce friction. Like you should own your code as a developer, and you should own it on its entire journey into production and even after production. I wrote a blog about this a while ago. I think I called it like the commodification of DevOps. And SRE is going through this similar sort of thing where you're seeing now, like you see AI powered SREs that you just like turn all these AI agents open on your cloud account and they'll do all this stuff for you. Every single movement in software engineering and software design and architecture and a lot of stuff is really this super interesting cycle of people, human beings, get this great idea of like, hey, what if we didn't have all of these policies and procedures and we didn't put everything into these boxes and we just said, we're going to make good software and we're going to ship it to people and we're going to own that entire process. And then them doing that and getting good results. And then someone coming in later and saying, but what if I could make money off of this process that you have created? And coming up with things like the Deloitte Agile Train, coming up with AI-based SRE, coming up with observability in a box, right? Like,
someone will always make money off your complexity.
right. Someone will make, anytime you introduce abstractions, anytime you create value, someone will try to multiply that, will capture that value for themselves.
Charity, I think, has always said this, where tools make borders, right? It's like if this team's using this tool and that team's using that tool, you now have two different teams.
Yeah.
Which is so weird, because as a solutions architect, we would talk to companies, but there were like a lot of big companies that the two teams could not talk to each other. They couldn't know that they were both using the same database or different databases. And I'm just like, so like you will pay enterprise support money to get advice when you could just talk to each other within your own teams.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Consultants make so much money just because they can transcend the borders of the teams. Yeah.
It baffles me how like I think abstraction and like complexity are all like part of the game, and sometimes they can make things better, but like it's wild how like we are creating our own like abstraction and loss of content. Like even some ways that we use automation is loss of context. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's so many ways that we're losing context with abstraction, automation, and just stupid rules that we've put in place. And it's like wild because it's like these are humans made like this worse like for other humans like intentionally. Like I don't understand. Like,
so I just by way of background, I used to work for a company called Lightstep that a couple years ago got bought by ServiceNow, and it was actually super interesting. I stayed there for a couple of years, and it was super interesting getting to talk to ServiceNow customers, because if you're familiar, like ServiceNow is a big enterprisey place and it sells to big enterprisey places, Fortune 100, massive multinational orgs. And talking to them about like observability was super fascinating because they would be talking about like, oh yeah, we have it's like their incidents would run for like weeks.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, oh, this is an incident and we fix it in an hour or a day. It's like, no, this has been going on for like 2 months. And I'm like, what?
Like we're working towards our first 9. We're going to get there.
And then you go and it's like, well, what, talk to me. And it's like, how does it happen? How do you solve these? And the most illuminating thing was talking to someone, and they were talking about like, yeah, so this was a telecom company, major telecom. And I'm like, well, when these things happen, like how are, who's getting alert, like who owns the problem, who's getting alerted? And they walked me through. It's like, oh yeah, they have this very, very comprehensive, incident response process where it's like we have incident commanders and these are all the different steps. And I'm like, it's like, okay, I understand you have this great process, cool, but it's still taking you like months to resolve things. Like, how are people getting information? Like, how are people getting data? And it's like, well, yeah, that's part of the problem, because the people that can actually like change the code don't have access to the logs. I'm like, what? And then it's coming to find out, it's like the process involves like teams in different parts of the country, different parts of the globe, where literally, like, because of various security and access controls, would go into the one team would push a change, and then the next day, another team would go pull logs, redact them on their laptop, and then send snippets of those logs in a Teams message back to the first team. And that's how they're sharing data, because the access controls won't let them do it any other way. And it's like, I'm not entirely sure your problem is one of
technology
here. Like, just gonna be honest. But process is so hard to change, right? This is a heavily regulated company. Like, changing these processes would require probably tens or hundreds of months in terms of work across, hundreds of employees across the globe, just to make these little changes. And it's like, oh gosh, like this is a much bigger problem. Like, this is not something that a tool fixes.
Yeah. Well, but people are trying to buy DevOps, right? And how would
They
you?
are. They would love to buy DevOps.
How do you then lead them into OpenTelemetry is going to solve a problem for you?
So the thing that I actually got out of that entire experience was that, like, what fixes this in a lot of ways are standards. Like, technology itself, like, you can't buy a tool and expect the tool is going to solve these kind of like very thorny problems, because tools come with their own language. Tools come with their own, they make their own silos. But if you can get everyone speaking the same language, and you can get everyone kind of speaking the same dialect, and you can get everyone kind of aligned and like, what's important, what data do we need to figure out those important things? How is that data structured? How is that data meaningful? And can we give the data meaning? Can we have a standard for what gives the data meaning? Then that actually goes a long way towards solving the problem, because everyone is kind of, instead of being in their 40 or 50 different silos, now we're all talking about the same thing. And just being able to talk about the same thing and having that shared layer of understanding about what data is available, what format it's in, what it actually means, unlocks a lot of potential solutions for us to get past these kind of human problems. Because if everyone just gets to go and do it on their own, if everyone's creating their own logs and everyone's creating their own metrics, their own traces, and their own whatever, then you have these understanding gaps that you have to bridge, right? Because my logs are going to be whatever, and your logs are going to be whatever. And, if we kind of give everyone the ability to go and do it on their own, then my team's going to make a metric that kind of looks good for us. And then your team's going to make a metric that looks good for you. And everyone's going to have their vanity metrics that they talk about. OpenTelemetry steps into this as a way to unify these various things. It says, hey, here's a standard way to structure observability data. Here's a standard API for the instrumentation of code. Here's a standard set of semantic values that tell you, like, what does the data you're emitting mean? And here's this whole ecosystem of tools, open source, commercial, whatever, that it plugs into to help you analyze and better understand your systems. And that, I think, is the promise of OpenTelemetry, is that in the future, everything's using OpenTelemetry, and you don't have to think about, like, what logging API am I using, or do I have a metric or do I not have a metric? It just exists because OTel is built in. And if OTel is built in, then you're getting this stuff for free. And that's the promise. And that is why I work on it. And I'm really excited about it.
Now, I mean, there's been standards before, right? I mean, like intentional or accidental standards.
Yes.
Of things like Apache log format, right? Like the Apache log format and Nginx log format, like those are assumed standards for a lot of people, because everything else just conformed to this not great happenstance way of like accessing and grepping for logs. And I was like, had regex memorized for years on like how to pull out certain things from every single one of those, because everything emitted a similar type formats. But at the end of the day, like that ends up as some dashboard that someone's like, oh, now I'm validating my stuff against the dashboard. But then once another team is like, oh, we want to use the same data, but I care about different things, they fork the dashboard. And then we had a different conversation still. We're like, oh, at the end of the day, we're not actually talking about Apache logs. We're talking about the metric that you care about versus the metric I care about, and which one's more important.
Yeah. I do think there's a couple of important differences in how OTel kind of approaches this. One is that, we have this idea of telemetry being kind of sparse, right? And being highly contextual. So what I mean by that is we don't want to necessarily emit a bunch of telemetry about the same thing that means that is completely identical to each other. We want telemetry to layer on top of itself, and when it turn it from these three pillars, people might have heard of the idea of like traces, metrics, logs, the three pillars of observability. The OTel concept is more like, well, what if all this telemetry was just kind of like this one interlinked braid where it was all self-referential, where my metrics refer to my traces, which refer to my logs, which refer back to my metrics. And I can have this kind of shared context value at a technical level that helps me associate all these different things. And then also going a step further, saying like, okay, there's that core base level of telemetry that all my stuff should emit. But then I do need ways to process it. I do need ways to transform it for different use cases. Maybe some of it needs to go into different security team wants something different than an app dev wants, which is something different than a front end dev wants, which is something different than a DevOps team wants, whatever. That data needs to go to different places. That data might need to be transformed in certain ways as it goes to those different places. But as long as we're all working off the same base level, and if we're able to separate those concerns, or we'll say like the telemetry is down here, and then these kind of telemetry pipelines are one step above it, then it becomes much easier to kind of satisfy everyone's needs while not fundamentally changing the nature of what we're doing. Like, an important part of OTel is the idea that we support lossless transformation. So when you create a metric in OpenTelemetry, you can actually translate that metric into other forms. So you can change from like a delta, you can change like how it's aggregated or how it's displayed using views, using other kind of techniques. And that is not a lossy transformation. You can actually work that backwards depending on how you have your stuff set up.
Okay, friends, I'm here with a new friend of ours over at Timescale, Avthar. So Avthar, help me understand, what exactly is Timescale?
So Timescale is a Postgres company. We build tools in the cloud and in the open source ecosystem that allow developers to do more with Postgres. So using it for things like time series analytics, and more recently, AI applications like RAG and search and agents.
Okay, if our listeners were trying to get started with Postgres, Timescale, AI application development, what would you tell them? What's a good roadmap?
If you're a developer out there, you're either getting tasked with building an AI application, or you're interested and you're seeing all the innovation going on in the space and want to get involved yourself. And the good news is that any developer today can become an AI engineer using tools that they already know and love. And so the work that we've been doing at Timescale with the PG AI project is allowing developers to build AI applications with the tools and with the database that they already know, and that being Postgres. What this means is that you can actually level up your career, you can build new interesting projects, you can add more skills without learning a whole new set of technologies. And the best part is it's all open source. Both PG AI and PG Vector Scale are open source. You can go and spin it up on your local machine via Docker, follow one of the tutorials on the Timescale blog, build these cutting edge applications like RAG and such without having to learn 10 different new technologies, and just using Postgres and the SQL query language that you probably already know and are familiar with. So yeah, that's it. Get started today. It's a PG AI project, and just go to any of the Timescale GitHub repos, either the PG AI one or the PG Vector Scale one, and follow one of the tutorials to get started with becoming an AI engineer just using Postgres.
Okay, just use Postgres, and just use Postgres to get started with AI development, build RAG, search, AI agents, and it's all open source. Go to timescale.com/AI, play with PG AI, play with PG Vector Scale, all locally on your desktop. It's open source. Once again, timescale.com/AI.
When I think of Elasticsearch and it was like, oh, I can make metrics from all of these logs that I'm gathering, and I can then like roll those up into a metric, and I'm like going the opposite direction where I'm taking this like really verbose low level thing into like, I want a number now.
Yeah.
OTel's not doing that, right?
Right. OTel isn't doing that part for you. What it's doing is it's giving you structured data that has all of the information you need to do that yourself. So either you as someone creating an observability platform. So for example, like a good example of this is, at Honeycomb, we support OpenTelemetry, and we accept all this OpenTelemetry data. Now on the back end, Honeycomb is kind of designed around this concept of arbitrarily wide events, which is not like, OTel gives you a span, it gives you a metric, it gives you a log message. So what we can do though is we can use those hints that are on the data. We can look at the structure as it comes in, and we can do interesting tricks to turn metrics into things that are better able to be queried in Honeycomb by looking at that metadata that OpenTelemetry is giving us. And other people could do this too, right? Like someone could go and say, like, just hypothetically, let's say a Grafana or whoever had a metric database and wanted to only allow you to run valid queries on certain types of metrics, like not letting you do a rate for a gauge or whatever, or not letting you do certain transformations that wouldn't make sense based on the type of metric it is, then they could actually enforce that by looking at the hints from OTel about like, what is this structured data about this metric? Okay, these are the valid query types for that. Now, not a lot of people do this. In fact, I'm not sure anyone actually does this right now. And that's totally natural. Like, it's going to take a while before the analysis side kind of catches up, I think, to what OTel is providing, because OTel is a very low level sort of foundational part of this, right? And I understand why vendors and other people aren't necessarily trying to build on top of this fast moving open source project. Totally valid. So when I think about like what does the future look like with OTel, it actually doesn't look a lot like today. It looks more thinking like, what is the next sort of generation of observability tooling look like, which is a super interesting question that I don't think we've seen a lot of people start to explore yet.
I think observability and metrics are so like underrated, and trying to troubleshoot and like really have good insight into what you're building. When you're trying to gather all these different metrics and data and metadata, did you run into a lot of issues with trying to keep it like secure, but also to get all that data and put it in one place?
It depends. I think there's such a tension between like gathering the data you need to actually understand your system in production and understand like what's happening and give you enough fidelity and like resolution on that data to be able to kind of pinpoint problems, and also not collecting too much, right? Because if you get too much data, then the way I like to talk about it is like, there's really only kind of 3 states a system can be in. One is everything is absolutely fine, which never happens, but everything's absolutely perfect and we don't care. Or conversely, everything is broken and we also don't care because everything is broken, right? Now, most of the time, the overwhelming majority of the time, no system is in a everything is perfect or everything is broken state, right? You're always in the middle, especially in like a distributed system or a decentralized system. Some services will respond more slowly than others. Errors will just happen. These are things that we have to program around. We have to code defensively and have backoffs and retries and pressure relief valves and da 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 da. So, what is the right amount of data? It kind of depends on a lot of factors that have less to do with the data and more to do with like what do you care about and prioritize as an engineering team? Like, what are the things that you are optimizing towards? I think, if you've read Charity and Liz's book on observability engineering, it talks a lot about measuring things from the perspective of the customer. Who is your user? That's their experience you should care about. And I really like that framing because like, why else are you building software if not for people?
I think people really forget that. We get into building the cool thing or building something different or what we want, and not thinking about who your actual audience and customer is.
Yeah.
What was your biggest challenge when building OpenTelemetry, though? Like as far as like a technical challenge, or even if it's not technical?
Well, I'm not going to take credit for building OpenTelemetry. It's definitely been a huge effort by hundreds and thousands of contributors. Honestly, right? Like we're the second biggest project in the CNCF behind Kubernetes. Last time I checked, we're like one of the top 25 open source projects on GitHub, and like just in terms of like size, which is incredibly like rewarding and validating just to see how much interest there's been. I think the hardest part of any very large project is just kind of like keeping everyone like motivated and going the same direction, especially when you've got something that's, if you think about the kind of scope of OpenTelemetry, we have APIs and SDKs in 13 different languages. We have this kind of tooling ecosystem built in Go. We have an overwhelming amount of documentation that needs to be written and updated. We have a really vibrant community, but communities need to be nurtured, and you need to like give people the ability, ways to grow in that. I think definitely the hardest part has been governance and like trying to keep all that energy positive and going in the right direction, making sure that when people come to work on OTel, they're working on like OTel is their first team and not like whoever they work for. Especially when you're dealing with in the observability space, there's a ton of companies,
cross-company requirements and demands, and like
right?
we're doing this for the projects, yeah.
Right, just making sure that everyone kind of thinks about OpenTelemetry first and not their own employer.
One of my Like as a systems person, I always saw OTel as it's like the APM replacement, right? It's a thing that the devs do in the apps, and it's not for my systems. I know we want logs, but I see that being talked about as I want application logs. I don't care about system logs. I know there are OTel agents or things that emit data from a system level. Is that still the intention? Like, are people implementing systemd unit files with OTel in them built in? Because there's no such thing as like a span on a systemd service, right? So like I
Right.
have different things that I can even do. Where is that overlap going to be? Because when the dev says, hey, my app is getting this, and OTel, I have this metric, it's bad, I still need to correlate that a level below into the OS.
So absolutely, OpenTelemetry is intended for like both application and system level, telemetry. We have a tool called the collector, which is kind of like a Swiss Army knife that will suck data up from almost anything, including like journal D. It will get host metrics, host logs. If you have files and you want to point it at files, it'll slurp those up.
Var log star, just get it and send it all over, right?
Right. Like it's very, customizable. One thing that we can do is that we can try really hard to like associate in a collector, we can actually associate those particular application level metrics and logs and traces with system level data as well. So either directly, like if we have a context value in both places, like a trace ID or something, then you can associate it that way. But we also have ways to kind of associate this concept called a resource. So in OTel, you have these special attributes that are called resource attributes, and they identify unique sources. So what you can do is you have, imagine I have a Kubernetes cluster or just a fleet of EC2 VMs, and I've got 100 instances of my application running. By looking at those resources and kind of aggregating across resource, I can see like, okay, yes, there was this problem in the app, and I see which node it came from, which pod it came from, and then I can also see like, okay, what was the system, what were the system metrics and logs and so on and so forth from that resource. And then if I have tooling for it that can kind of like give me a unified view of this, then I can really easily pivot between those two things. Again, this is something that the tools need to kind of support. The tool, you have to have an experience for this, either in a tool you've built yourself or something you've kind of stitched together. We do provide the raw data, but it's up to consumers to kind of like figure out how to take that raw data and to get it into a usable form or do analysis with it. I shouldn't say usable form.
JSON's very usable, right? I got JQ. We're good.
Yeah, right. It's the data is usable. It's just it's heavy data, right? Like it's dense. I think that's one of the biggest complaints we get about OTel, and I don't think it's wrong, is that it's like super low level. And it's something that we hear a lot, and and we're trying to, it's something we think a lot about as a project from like a governance perspective, and also like at individual like language levels, like how do we make it easier to use. One thing that we started recently is this new special interest group on developer experience, which is really aimed at like, okay, what are the things that we need to do as a project to make OpenTelemetry easier to use as a developer or as a systems administrator, right? Like where are we missing the mark? Because the goal, I think originally, the goal is that OTel should be native to, your system. It should be native to your framework. If you're using, Express.js or you're using C# or whatever, like it should just kind of be there. And so we have to write at a low level to integrate at a low level. But a lot of people, when they think about observability, they don't think at that low level. They think more at the like, oh, I just drop this agent in and it does all this stuff for me. And we have stuff that is kind of like drop in agent and it does all this stuff for you. But it's really more of that's like a bootstrap, right? That's like we had to do this for people to actually use it, because nobody's going to go to all the trouble of like writing all this instrumentation themselves. They need the easy button.
The hello world for observability.
And honestly, like I do think there's a pretty good argument that, if you don't have anything, then something is better than nothing. And so having an easy button that's just like, yeah, this shows you all of your database calls and your HTTP calls, like that is really useful, especially if you didn't have that before.
I think it's important to have different levels of like easy and then more customizable, so people can kind of use their use case and their understanding of your product,
even going back to remembering the first time that like I ran dmessage on a Linux host, and I'm just like, oh, I wasn't doing anything on this server, and it's doing a lot of stuff. Like, I don't know what it's doing, but it's doing it.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. That's everything in software. Like it's the good and bad part about. I reflect sometimes, like when I was a child, when I was like 10. When I was like younger than that, I learned BASIC, and I wrote a little database in BASIC to keep track of my baseball cards, and it was fun. Like, and I got older, and I wanted to get, I had a Macintosh, and I wanted to do like GUI programming, and so I got Prolog books. I got like C books, and I tried to learn the GUI stuff in the event loop, and I was just, oh boy, that did not go well. But it was because it was so, it's like things were hard. Like even with the libraries and like the system level stuff, the affordances it gave you, it's still like you had to do quite a bit of work yourself to write a GUI. And now it is a billion times easier.
And they work a lot better.
You don't even need, HTML, CSS, all this. If I wanted to write a graphical program, I don't need to like learn super low level draw, rect, whatever. I can just create a div and say, oh, here's this Tailwind class, and boom, I have a box. That makes it easier to use, and that's great. But those, like, all of that creates abstractions that we might not necessarily need to completely understand what's going on under the hood, but what is going on under the hood does matter, and it can impact performance, and it can impact like are people having a good experience. And so there's like a really fine line, I think, with instrumentation and telemetry of how far down do you really need to go to get the data you need to do the analysis to figure out, like, are people having a good time?
Going full circle there with your GUI Mac apps. Your website is awesome. If it, aparker.io is a classic Mac looking WordPress theme, right? Like it's on top of, it's a theme you have that looks like a classic Mac. And when we had Dave Eddy on a few weeks ago, you could curl his websites. And I love promoting anyone running their own websites, because I think that that's still the backbone of the internet, is people that have a website and they update it occasionally and they put some content there. Whatever it is that you want to do, you just do it.
Your website is so cool.
I'm actually I'm in the middle of my spare time project has been rewriting that. I started doing this before the entire WordPress thing started happening. But just to go even more full circle, like Justin, we started this conversation. We started I am here because of a conversation on Blue Sky, the world's, hold on, right? Currently, maybe America's number 2 social network in the App Store. I need to check. Yeah. Interesting times in text-based social media. But one thing that's like super cool to me about Blue Sky is that it's built in this thing called AT Protocol. And AT Protocol does 2 things I really love. One is that it uses domains as kind of like as handles.
Identity.
Yeah, it's like your domain is like the cornerstone of your identity. And it also is very big on you should have control of your content online. And so I've been rewriting that blog to run off of an AT Proto PDS, personal data server. And it's actually it's super interesting because it's, one, always fun to try out new things, but 2, like it gives you this really interesting vision of the future where it's like I could have a single server that kind of that this is my identity, right? Like this server has all these different things and speaks all these different protocols. Like if I talk to it via HTTP, I get a website. If I talk to it via some other protocol, I get microblog, right? And you can verify all this stuff because it's all cryptographically signed. And so you can say, like, if someone sends you a link to something, you could prove that, like, yes, this is a blog that I wrote. And if I edit it, you could verify that, it's been edited. I don't know. Everything's been very static, I think, in terms of the internet for quite a while. And I'm starting to believe that people are kind of seeing that the very managed sort of corporate internet that we have all been using quite frequently over the past like 20 years isn't really sustainable. That like you can't actually run a business off of just selling ads. I mean, you can, but
also it just owning some things on the internet makes it more fun.
Yeah. Like if you own stuff, like if you have control of stuff, it's good. Like that's the internet. You should have control of stuff. It is.
And with that comes responsibility.
True.
Like, you have to be responsible for what that looks like on a global network of things. So yeah.
Yeah. Like, I think there's this, we have lost that spirit of like, you think back to the 90s or 2000s, and so you go to someone's GeoCities site and you would see just like amazing things. It's why I apologize to anyone that's like really big into the idea of decentralized finance, but it's why, like, when you heard about people talking about like the metaverse and buying virtual real estate, I'm like, this is so antithetical to the internet. Like, the point of the internet is that you don't run out of space.
Yeah, don't make it scarce.
Yeah.
Except for IP addresses. That was just a bad.
Yeah, well, we got V6 now. We're good. Yeah,
No
people
one's
try
on
to
it.
impose scarcity, I think, on like the idea of space in the internet is just very it doesn't sit well with me, and I'm it's why I'm so excited about stuff like AT protocol and this idea of a web and an internet that like you invest in. This is your space online. This is your part of this global network of human beings, and you aren't just renting time from some large company or erratic billionaire, right?
I'll be glad to be able to invest in one place and not have to worry about losing everything every time it's hijacked by some rich guy.
Exactly.
I mean, the most important thing of that is the place should be the thing you own, right?
Yes.
You're not investing in someone else's place. You have to buy a domain and you invest in your space. And just as Austin said, if you own a website, you are constantly in a state of rewriting it or moving it or doing something else to it, because that's why it's fun.
Sometimes I think I'll never get it done, though, if it's like all mine.
That's fine. It doesn't matter. It's fun.
Yeah. And I also want to say, like, obviously that's not for everybody. I think it's a great thing. I think it's a totally, like, I do think that there should totally be on-ramps for people that aren't interested in that, right? But, conversely, you don't need not everyone needs a project car, not right? You can go buy a Corolla and get around.
Some people are just fine with Uber all the time, right?
Some people are fine with Uber or public transit, right? We need to, we have to support everyone in their journey. But I think that in a lot of ways, like, that spirit of like, this is my little corner of the internet is what needs to come back. Like, I don't see it necessarily as I see it as like a spiritual thing more than anything else. Like, take it or leave it. But it really is like, you have to have some level of like investment. It's the internet is, the internet is a global network of human beings, and like any network, it is a community, and you get out of a community what you put into it, right? Don't be a bad neighbor and throw your branches up against someone else's fence. I don't know.
I feel that. Where can people find you?
You can find me around the world at various events. You can find me mostly online on Blue Sky at aparker.io. You can find my blog at aparker.io.
What do you know? The same thing.
Yeah, the same thing. You can find me on GitHub at Austin L. Parker, and I'm on various Slacks and other places. So
we'll have some links in the show notes. Thank you so much, Austin, for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. This was super fun.
Thank you. It was nice talking to you.
Great talking to you both.
3, 2, 1.
Thanks for listening to Ship It with Justin Garrison and Autumn Nash. Subscribe now if you haven't already. Head to shipit.show for all the ways, or just search for Ship It wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find us. Thanks once again to our partners at fly.io, to the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder for these dope beats, and to Sentry. Use code CHANGELOG when you sign up and save $100 off their team plan. That's all for now, but come back next week when we continue discussing everything that happens after Git Push.